Hello and welcome, it's me Nathan, your friendly neighborhood support engineer. In today's video we're going to be talking about outbound routes. But before we begin, I just want to make a mention of what firmware I'm currently on. So on this UCM 6202, I'm currently on 17.16. You can check that out on the program version. Next, another thing that we'll need is some registered extensions. We will be using 1000 in order to call out on that outbound route. Now I will go over two case scenarios. One's going to be an analog outbound route and the other one's going to be a VoIP outbound route. Now there's really no difference between how you configure them, but I will go over a couple considerations when working with those two mediums for trunks. PRI, it's going to be exactly like a VoIP trunk, except obviously it's completely different than a VoIP trunk, but the outbound route is applied the same, so you could use this in referencing PRI trunks. So moving forward, I'm going to go ahead and click on outbound routes. Now just to clarify, all an outbound route will do is route any calls to any trunk medium that you have. So this could be a VoIP trunk, this could be an analog line, or a PRI connection. It really doesn't matter. But to get started, we're going to click Add Outbound Routes. Few things here. We have a calling rule name. Now I'm going to set this one up with my VoIP trunk. This would probably be the easier of the two. Let's call this VoIP 1. Now one thing I like to do to start out is I like to add X period and plus X period. Now the reason why I do this on a VoIP trunk is because oftentimes when you receive a call from an incoming call from a trunk provider, oftentimes they'll be sending the caller ID information with a plus in front of the number. So if you're receiving a plus value, it's always important that, especially for a VoIP trunk, you add this plus value back to that, just so that you don't have to be burdened by forgetting to include a plus when any of your callers or your customers receive a caller ID with a plus in the outbound route. Now, just to get a gist of what this pattern is going to do, there's a couple characters that we can choose from. We can use exclamation, we can use N, Z as well. All of them are going to be oriented to a certain number value. I'm more biased towards X because obviously that covers a whole range of 0 through 9, and that's basically all you need to dial out, except for the plus value. But we also have others like Z and N, and they do have their value here. N is going to be 2 through 9, and Z is going to be 1 through 9. Now, you could format this correctly if you wanted to do it properly, like Z, N, XX at the beginning of a number to dial, but I really don't go that far. I mean, it makes it look really neat. It makes it look a little bit more clear in what the actual outbound route is, but you don't have to get too much into actually using it. I use X period all day and I have no problem. Another consideration that we also have to make is how we're going to authenticate extensions that are trying to dial out. For this example, I'm going to show you just one for right now. This is going to be privilege level. Now, any extension that you create by default, unless you change it, it's going to have a privilege level set to internal. Now, this really has no bearing on what extensions are allowed to dial. Your pattern makes that determination here. So with that being said, I know extension 1000 has a privilege level of internal, and we'll check that in a little bit. You could also set a password on this, which is going to be a numerical value, just to check some users from dialing out on a certain pattern. We could also enable filter on source caller ID, which you can then add what extensions you want to be allowed in the selected list to make that outgoing call. I'll go over that pretty soon. From here, I will actually select my trunk median. So this will be my set trunk VoIP trunk. We also have a strip value and a prepin value. A strip will always come before the prepin, but if I include 3 in here, that means I will strip the first 3 values on whatever is being dialed by the extension. Oftentimes you won't have to use this, but I will give you a couple case scenarios in which you might. Prepending as well. This is what we're going to be adding to a dialed number. So, we could add 1909, which is the area code for those who don't want to actually include those values if they want to dial 7 digits. That's going to be more important for analog lines especially. We also have our failover trunk. And I will add a failover trunk of our analog line. So just in case our internet connection goes down, at least we can still use the analog trunks. But as you can see, it still gives me an option to strip and prepin those values. We could also add time conditions as well, on which time we would like certain routes to be added. So maybe during certain times of the day you'd want to route traffic you might want to route traffic some of the time, but not all the time. So you can actually have a time condition on your outbound routes as well. So it's no longer an inbound route only feature. With that being said, let's go ahead and start testing this. Gotta make sure I save first. Save at the top. It will say that an internal permission level can be a security risk. That's once again because when you first create an extension, it will be internal inherently. So keep that in mind. If you barely create a new extension and you don't want that person dialing internationally and they do that, they will do that. So watch out for that. I'm going to go ahead and apply changes. Now that I have that outbound route set, I'm going to go ahead and now test it. So I'm going to go ahead and call my cell phone. And there my phone is ringing. Perfect. Alright, moving forward, let's go ahead and test the analog lines. I'm going to go ahead and name this outbound route analog all. Now, for the pattern, we are going to be a little bit more choosy. Unlike the VoIP trunk, we won't add a plus in this pattern, but I will add 7 digits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, I'm going to only include this because with analog trunks, I like to separate 3 options for analog trunks. One 7-digit dialing. And the reason why I do that is so I can prepend my area code for my customer. So if they ever dial 7 digits, the prepin of 1 and the area code will be sent out. Now, a lot of analog providers, they are very choosy on how you will be doing this. So sometimes they will require that you put 1, the area code, and the full number. Some just prefer the area code and the number. So it's important that if you are working with analog lines, you might want to start out with X period, which will allow you to dial basically anything, because a period value will accept anything after that. So any value after that will be accepted. So definitely test how your analog lines like to be dialed out on first before committing to any changes that you make. I'm going to go ahead and select my trunk, analog trunks. We even have a call duration limit as well for our outbound route, so keep that in mind. You can restrict how long, and I believe seconds or minutes, how long a call. I believe it is seconds. Warning time, maximum duration. Yeah, this is in seconds, so you can choose in seconds how long you want something to be. You could also give them a warning time, which will give them a quick beep, how long that beep interval will be repeated as well. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to restrict them on how long they're going to be able to dial out for. But we have all the same options here as our VoIP trunk. But let me go ahead and continue with the other part of my configuration. So there's my analog trunk, analog all. We have 7-digit dialing included, and we're going to be pre-pinning one in the area code. I'm going to add another one here. This one's going to be 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Calling rule. Analog all. This one will include the 1. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-pin 1. I'm going to set my privilege level to internal. I'm very satisfied with that route. Oops, except for I got to remember to add my trunk in there. Now the cool thing is you can actually switch trunks on demand as you edit an outbound route. So on our previous firmware we weren't able to do that, but that's a really cool feature. If I ever wanted to make this route I have for my VoIP trunk and analog, I could just simply edit it and switch it from VoIP to analog. We weren't able to do that before, so that's a really cool and handy feature. Now I'm going to add one more here. Now this is going to be for one, the area code and the number, so 11-digit dialing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Same thing. I'm going to go ahead and name my analog. I'll just call analog for right now. I think I kind of exhausted my resources on that. I'm going to set this to internal. Trunk method, analog line. Perfect. Let's save that. We know about that warning. Alright, perfect. With the outbound routes now created, if I was to dial from my extension, question here, what would it hit first? So in order to determine that, we're actually going to be looking at the sequence number. Now the sequence number will always choose the first available, or the one up at top. So if I was to dial out right now, it would hit my VoIP trunk, and it would probably never hit my analog lines, not unless I specifically put in a pattern rule that was designed to be specific to a certain trunk. Like maybe you want a pre-pinned 9 when selecting your VoIP trunk. We can actually get into that and do that for you. But yeah, if I was to dial out right now, it would always go out my VoIP trunk because that's my first available pattern. Now, if I wanted my first choice to be my analog trunks, I would make sure I select my VoIP trunk and throw this all the way down to the bottom of the sequence number. Now you can see my VoIP trunk being at the bottom here. I would be pretty confident in saying that the first route available to my extensions are going to be my analog first, and it's going to check the order sequentially. So it's going to look at the top. Did I dial 7 digits? If not, I'll move to the next line over. Did I dial 10 digits? If not, maybe I dialed 11, then it'll choose the sequence number 3 to dial out on, and it'll follow that rule and pattern. Let's say I dialed internationally. Obviously analog lines would not cover that because we only have 7, 10, and 11 digit dialing. So my next best route would be my VoIP trunk, and predominantly you would want a VoIP trunk to route international calling. Obviously it's cheaper than doing that through analog lines. So I'm pretty satisfied with that. That's basically outbound routes in a nutshell. Alright, so I'm going to get into the more advanced setups and kind of walk you through other ways that we can, prevent users from dialing out on certain trunks, and as well as verifying extension permission level. 9 times out of 10, if I have a customer calling me asking me, what's wrong with my trunks, it's usually permission levels. They just recently created a new extension, and as a result, they just overlooked it really quickly. It's one of the easiest things to overlook. So if I actually go to my extension 1000, I can check its permission level by editing it. And I can see that my permission level is set to internal. Now, regarding permission, internal is the lowest, local is the higher value after that. National is higher than local, and international is higher than national. So keep that in mind when setting permission levels on your extensions. But obviously, I'm not going to be restricted dialing out, because right now all my outbound routes are set with a privilege level of internal. Now, let's say I didn't want any of my extensions to use the analog lines, and let's say I actually wanted them all to use the VoIP trunks, and maybe we should only reserve the analog line for a CEO. I can go ahead and have that done just by changing my method in which we're going to be using to authenticate anyone dialing outbound. So I'm going to go into my analog trunks, and I am going to use enable filter on source caller ID. And from here, I can actually select what extensions I want to dial out. So this just makes privilege level, throws it out the door, and you never have to worry about using privilege level again. So I'm going to go ahead and select my 1000 extension, and I am going to make that the CEO extension. I'm going to do this for all my analog trunks. And as you can see, the privilege level is now set to disabled, because we're not actually using a privilege level to authenticate extensions anymore. I'm going to do the same thing here. Add 1000. And it's as easy as that. Now, the cool thing that you can also do with enable filter on source caller ID is you can actually add just more than extensions. If you wanted to, you can actually add a dialed number onto there, like let's say your cell phone, because oftentimes someone might want to forward a call from their extension using call forward unconditional, and if that happens to be a number and that extension tries to forward out to one of these trunks, you might get stopped right then and there. So you can actually edit a current trunk and add your own custom number to it. Just like that. So you can save that and apply that change. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to mess anything up just yet. But as you can see here, all my analog lines are set to disable. So if you want to check who's allowed to dial, you will have to edit that trunk. But currently only 1000 is allowed to dial outbound at this current moment. Then all other users will be able to use the VoIP trunk. Up next, I'm going to talk a little bit about pin groups and how it can help you with identifying extensions that are dialing out. Now, a pin group is helpful because it will force a user dialing out with the matching pattern to identify themselves with that pin. With that being said, let's go ahead and add our first group. I'm going to name this support. Now, a good case scenario for this, and I have set this up for some of my customers, is to maybe forbid some people from dialing CEO's extension. CEO's tired of getting prank called by their employees, so we'll actually set this up in a manner that I'm more familiar with. I'm going to go ahead and actually record this call, because if someone will be dialing the CEO, we want to make sure that we record that call just in case, so we can identify their voice. I'm going to then add my members here. Now this really isn't a members list, but this is what determines what members will be allowed to use this PIN number. So only people in support will know that in order to authenticate themselves correctly with their PIN, they will have to dial 1234 4321. PIN name, I will call this support. I'm going to go ahead and save, and as you can see there, our PIN number 1234 4321, and the PIN name for that is support. I'm going to go ahead and click save. Now that that PIN group has been inputted, I'm going to go ahead and apply changes. Cancel out of this. And we're going to add a very specific route here. Now, a rule I always apply when doing really specific routes is I always add them to the top, because obviously it's going to check from top to bottom first, so we're going to want our more specific routes at top anyways. So this one's going to be really specific. CEO number. And his phone number is 1-909 555 1234. Now we could add the variants depending upon who they're dialing, but I know for my analog line or VoIP trunk, either one, the area code and the full number will be required. But if we want to cover our bases here, I'm going to go ahead and add this over 3 times, and I'm actually going to get rid of some of these numbers. So this got us covered for both the area code, the number, and 7-digit dialing. Let's go ahead and we'll send this out the VoIP trunk, because I know the VoIP trunk will accept all 3 of those methods. And for the authentication, we are actually going to add the PIN group of support. As you can see, it also disables privilege level. Now if we want, we could add the failover trunk as you saw before. I think I'm perfectly okay with that. And as my rule should apply, all the specific routes are going to go at the top, the more general towards the bottom. Let's apply changes. Alright. Now let's go ahead and give you that example. I'm going to go ahead and dial the CEO's number.
Please enter your password followed by the pound key.
Alright, so I'm going to follow the instructions. And the PIN number was 1234 4321, followed by the pound.
Thank you. Your call cannot...
Now, my call got rejected on that one because that's a non-routable number, obviously. But that's how PIN groups work, and this is a very handy tool, especially when you want to identify who's actually dialed out at that time using that PIN group. So if I actually go to the CDR now, and if that was a successful call, I could actually see a call from 1000 dialing to that number. So this is a really handy way to identify who's calling what at a certain time in your CDR, and I can even see that the account code that was dialed was the support count code. So let's say you had an employee who found out what the PIN code was for that. You can identify if they're using a code that they're not supposed to be. Now that we have our outbound routes set, you could restrict outbound routes on your dialing pattern, but to be quite honest, if you don't want to set a certain pattern up and set the privilege level to disabled, that will actually stop someone from dialing it. That was the old way we used to do blacklist back on our previous firmware, but with the current, I think it was up until like 12, I believe, we had the outbound blacklist. Don't quote me on that one, but this is a very handy feature which makes your life a lot easier because it already has predefined country codes. So just by enabling that country code, you can disable whether you want to allow calls to that. So let's say I only wanted calls to go out to the United States. I don't want Canada, any other country for that matter, to be dialing out. All I have to do is go ahead and start enabling each country code that I don't want to be allowed to call out. Now I could continue doing this throughout the whole list. I'm not going to. We could also manage our blacklist file too, so we can actually choose and upload certain blacklist. As you can see, this will be in a CSV format, so you can do this by batch if you really wanted to. You could also add specific rules in here as well. So let's go ahead and say we don't want anyone calling the CEO's extension 555-1234. I can go ahead and add this blacklist rule. After it's been added, I can actually go down and see which ones that we have opened out to us. There's that one I just created. Here's one I created earlier, but I didn't actually apply the change, but I actually restricted 800 numbers from being able to dial out. You even have the option to export this list. So let's say on a previous customer you've had it set perfectly, you never had any issues whatsoever. You can go ahead and click the export button, and you could even do this to check what the file format is when it exports it in the CSV format, and you could edit that directly if you want and re-upload it just by adding it back to another UCM or even the current UCM that you're using. But that's all you really need to know as far as blacklist is concerning. We'll go ahead and apply those changes. And with that being said, we'll go ahead and cancel out of here. And that's how you do an outbound blacklist. This outbound blacklist will work for all trunks, so it's not trunk specific. So you want to keep that in mind if you want to do a trunk specific blacklist. Let's say our VoIP trunk is the only trunk we don't want 800 numbers going out of. Obviously we'll go ahead and not do the blacklist. My bad, I was trying to click add there. I'm going to go ahead and add a restriction to a specific trunk. Let's say we don't want anyone on the VoIP trunk to call the CEO's number. So we'll say 1-909-555-1234. Calling rule name, no, CEO. Okay. So for this, I'm going to keep the privilege level disabled. So if I keep it disabled, then that means really no one's allowed to call it. I mean, we're not using enable filter and source caller ID. We're not using pin groups here. We're not even using privilege level. So what else is the system going to use? It doesn't know, because it's not going to be able to route it anymore because it has no way to authenticate extensions. So it's just going to reject it. I'm going to select the VoIP trunk. Going to save this. It will give me that warning, says, are you sure you want to do this on a privilege level that is disabled? And we're going to click OK. And because it's a very specific rule, and that's going to have to go at the top, I'm going to apply changes, and we're really going to be able to test the sequence number now, because we have two options for the CEO. One at the very top, which is going to be a disabled privilege level, but not because it has the enable filter and source caller ID. Obviously, we set that privilege level to disable, so if I dial it right now, it will not let me dial out. I got a 403 forbidden, and if you know anything about the SIP protocol, you know 403 is a rejected. It's refusing to actually route that number. So let me go ahead and delete that so you can see that that's what that actually was. Now if you were following along, if I dial it again this time, it will force me to do my pin group.
Please enter your password followed by the pound key.
There it goes. And as you can see, that works successfully. Now, just be aware after applying changes, you might have to wait a little bit before dialing out on a VoIP trunk. There might be at least a 6-second delay before you're able to dial out. So if you're working on a production system, just be cautious when applying changes. We hope that you found that video tutorial helpful, and if you did, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to our channel for the latest in video tutorials. I'm Nathan Sharp. You have a good one.